Hi all. So today we're going to be adding ActiveMQ onto our Zabbix with some custom scripts. We're going to monitor the queues and the consumers on ActiveMQ that are being used. So log into our ActiveMQ server, and the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a specific user for Zabbix in order to call the API so that we can get the queues and the messages on each queue. For that, we're going to go into our Jetty Realm properties. And at the bottom, we're just going to add a Zabbix user. And we're going to give them admin permissions. After that, we just need to restart ActiveMQ. And now we should be able to log into our ActiveMQ instance with the Zabbix user that we just created, the password of password. Cool. So we're going to create some test queues for now. So we're just going to create 3 simple queues. Normally your applications would be, or your producers would be creating the queues and your consumers would be emptying them. We haven't got that at the moment, so we're just going to create some queues, and then what we're going to do is we're going to send some messages to each queue so that they're not empty. So our first queue can have 5. We'll make sure it's persistent so when it restarts, it's still there. We don't really mind what the messages contain, it's just the message count that we're interested in. For queue 2, we'll make it 10, and Q3 will make it 100, just so that we have a varied amount of messages in each queue. Cool. So you'll see in the repo there's going to be 3 scripts. These are 3 custom scripts that we're going to be using. What these do is these call the API in order to get the data in JSON format, and then we pull the data from that. So ActiveMQ get consumers will get the consumers on ActiveMQ. Get queue size will take in a specific queue name, as you can see over here, and it will give you the amount of messages in that queue. And ActiveMQ just get queues will just output the queues on the instance. One thing that you need to check is at the top I've got the variables, the AMQ broker name, the AMQ username, and the AMQ password. The username and password are the user and password that we created that we're going to be using for Zabbix. And this AMQ broker name is the name you gave your ActiveMQ instance. It's in the ActiveMQ XML. If you're not sure what it is, you can always come to home and the broker name is here. On our instance, it's just localhost. So those are the 3 variables that you're going to have to make sure are correct. And because we're going to be putting these scripts onto the actual ActiveMQ servers, we're just going to be using localhost in order to call it and send in our origin as localhost as well. So let's get into our ActiveMQ home directory, and we're going to be creating these 3 scripts. You can either copy them across or just manually create them. I'm going to just manually create them quickly. My variables are all correct, so I don't need to worry about that. Okay, we've got our 3 scripts on the server now. We're going to have to change the ownership to ActiveMQ for the scripts. And we're going to have to give it execute permissions because they are scripts. There we go, that looks right. We need to ensure that we have JQ installed because this is going to come out as raw data and we want to pass it as JSON. So now we should be able to run the ActiveMQ just queues because that uses no variable. The get queue size uses a variable and the get consumers uses a variable. They're both going to be using the queue name, but the get queues is just going to output all the queues on the instance. So if we run this manually now, just to confirm that it is all installed correctly and working, we get the JSON back for Q1, Q2, and Q3. And typically it would be, I think we're actually passing it back. Okay, we are putting it into JSON format at the end over here. That's why it looks like this. If we didn't have this and we just curled this, just so that we have an understanding of what we're running here, and we're going to run this curl manually on the server. So the things we'd have to change is the broker name. For us, that was localhost. And the username and the password, which was Zabbix and password in our case. So this is how it outputs it normally. And that's why we have got JQ installed so that we can pass it and process it as JSON information. That is what this part here is doing. Okay, so we've got our 3 scripts on here. We've confirmed that our username and password is working. We can call it locally. So we can move on. And what we're going to do is we're going to edit our Zabbix conf in order to create the custom user parameters for the scripts that we've created. We've already got the Zabbix agent on the server, so we don't need to worry. So we don't need to worry about installing that. We're just going to come down to the bottom of it. And we're going to paste this in. So these are 3 user parameters. This is the ID of the query that we're doing, and over here is the script that we're calling. You can see that these 2 we're taking in variables. This is important for when we're on Zabbix and we're configuring it because we're going to use auto discovery. The reason we use an auto discovery is if new queues get added or queues get removed, we don't have to manually go and update it on Zabbix. It pulls it through automatically. The only one that doesn't have a variable is the ActiveMQ just get queues, because that's just going to get all the queues on the instance. So let's copy this. We've confirmed that our location of our scripts is correct. This is the home directory of our ActiveMQ install. And once we've done that, we also need to go and give Zabbix permission in order to call these scripts. So because it's running from the Zabbix agent, the Zabbix user will be running the Zabbix agent. You can see these files are owned by ActiveMQ, and they're in an ActiveMQ home folder. So what we're going to do is we're going to add Zabbix to the group of ActiveMQ, because these permissions say that the group can read and execute these scripts. And then what we're going to do is we're going to give permission to the ActiveMQ install folder and the ActiveMQ home folder. So now if we go and have a look at the home ActiveMQ folder, that would typically only be accessed by the ActiveMQ user. We've given the group access as well to read and execute, and Zabbix is part of that group. We can confirm that if we go to cat etc group, we grep for ActiveMQ, we should see the Zabbix user as part of that group. Then we can restart the Zabbix agent service to pick up the user parameters that we've added. And just to make sure, let's do a status on it to see that there isn't any issue with the Zabbix agent. Seems to be running, doesn't look like there's an error. So as the config for the ActiveMQ server that we need, the one thing that we do want to check is that firewall D. It should be there from the previous, but we want to ensure that port 10050 is open for the Zabbix agent in order to communicate with the server. All right, let's open up our Zabbix on the web UI. And if we go to our hosts and we go to the items for the ActiveMQ, we're going to be using discovery rules. And you'll see there's some discovery rules here already because it's assigned a Linux host. So the block devices and the mounted file systems and the network interfaces. If you add more, it'll pick them up automatically. If you remove some, it'll remove them automatically on Zabbix as well. We're going to be following the same approach for the queues and for the consumers that we're going to be reporting. So we're going to create a discovery rule, and I've put the details here. We can copy paste most of it. Let me just move this across so that we can see both at the same time. Make it a bit easier. How's it going like that? Okay, never mind. We'll just do it this way. The discovery rule, we're going to give it a name of ActiveMQ queue discovery. The key for this, for the queue discovery, is going to be linked directly to this user parameter. So because we're looking at the queue discovery, we're going to be getting the ActiveMQ queue names. So this would be the key. I think I've got that here as well. Yes, this one lines up with that one. So that's the key for the user parameter. We're going to change the update interval to 1 minute. Every hour update is not going to be enough for us. If the messages are moving fast or the queues are moving fast, then we need to know about it. While we're here, we're going to add our own variable, an LLD macro. That LLD macro is going to be for the queue name. So what it's going to do is all the queues that it gets from the JSON in the name, it's going to assign to the queue name variable. And we need that for when we start creating items on this discovery rule. So we can go add on there. And if we go to the item prototypes for this discovery rule, we're going to be creating 2 item prototypes on here. The 2 item prototypes are going to link to the queue size and to the consumers that we are creating. I've got the details down here. You'll see that these keys match up exactly with these keys as well. And instead of the star in the brackets, because we've got a variable on Zabbix that we're using for the queue name, we're going to be passing that in instead, the queue name. So the first item prototype, the name is going to be queue name. It's going to be the Zabbix agent. The key for it is going to be the queue size, and the variable we're passing it is the queue name. So it'll get the amount of messages in the queue for the specific queue that we're passing it. It's going to be numeric. We don't need to worry about units. And we just want to give it a tag so that it's a bit easier to report on and to build dashboards later on if you're going to be creating triggers. So what I'm doing is I'm using a variable we don't have on our instance on Zabbix at the moment, calling it ActiveMQ. And then the value we're going to give it is going to be messages, just so that we know that these items are linked to the messages for the queue. And then we're going to create another one. It's going to be fairly similar. Its name is also going to be queue name. This key, however, is going to be linked to the consumers because we'll be calling the consumer script, passing along the queue name variable. It's also going to be numeric unsigned. And the tag for this one, we're going to use ActiveMQ and consumers so that we know that this is the consumers. If we come back to the ActiveMQ queue discovery now, to the discovery list, we should see it's enabled and we shouldn't have any errors over here. If you do, you're just going to have to troubleshoot them to make sure that everything is correct. What you can also do to test is if we click on the discovery rule and we hit test and we do a get value, we should be getting some JSON data back. If there's a problem with permissions, it'll give you some details, and then you need to just go through the steps that are provided and make sure that you followed all of them correctly. But from this, we can see that that's working correctly. So what we're going to go and do now is we're going to go and create a dashboard for this. The dashboard we're creating is going to be called ActiveMQ. And unfortunately, Zabbix at the moment doesn't have a table graph or a table widget that we can use to report on. The best that I've found for this, which isn't completely ideal, but does kind of work, is the honeycomb. So we're going to call this the messages queue. The host we're going to be reporting on, the group, it's a Linux server. And in there, it's the ActiveMQ local lab. Item patterns, we're going to just tell it to look at everything. And what we're going to do is we're going to filter it down by the tags that we've given it. So this will be ActiveMQ equals and messages. So this will only return the messages. And then down at the thresholds, I'm just going to put in 3 thresholds. If you remember, we had a queue with 5, a queue with 10, and a queue with 100. So red, I'm going to say 100. So if it's more than 100, 100 or more, it should be red. If it is 10 or more, it can be yellow. And if it is 1 or more, it can be green. And we do an add. Now, when you do have a lot of queues, it does start cutting off the name of the actual queues. You can see here that it hasn't actually got the name of the queues over here. Host.name. We want to change to item.name. Decimal places, we don't need decimal places. These are whole numbers. And apply. So now we would have our queue names at the top, and then based on the amount of messages in the queue, the color of the honeycomb would be different. So when you do have long queue names, or it does start building up and you have quite a few queues, it does cut off a bit. So honeycomb isn't ideal, but at the moment, this is the base dashboard that I found that we're currently using. On this side, we would have consumers. We're going to follow the same path. It's a Linux servers that we want reporting on, the ActiveMQ server. Item patterns, we're just going to put in star, and we're going to use the item tags and limit it to only consumers. We will change it to the item.name so it has the consumer name. Or no, it wouldn't be the consumer name, it would be the queue name. And then we can go and add some thresholds. I'm going to put it red if it's 0, 1 if it's, or yellow if it's 1. And actually, I'm going to remove that and just put green if it's 1. So if there are no consumers, it will show as red. If there is a consumer or more than one consumer, it would show as green. Currently, we don't have any consumers, and I haven't got any consumer applications in order to turn these green at the moment. But as soon as we start having consumers on the queue, they would be showing as green. We can come and remove the decimal places here as well. These are whole numbers. If we have a look over here, that links up to Q1, 5, Q2, 10, Q1, 5, Q2, 10, and Q3, 100. And if you were to go and add other queues, like another queue, and let's send this 1,000 messages. And let's go add another queue, a queue with a really long name that will certainly be cut off. And you can leave that as 0. If we refresh here, this isn't going to show immediately. We could wait a minute, or what we could do is we could come into the monitoring and go to the items for the ActiveMQ, the discovery rule, and we can execute this now. In order for it to trigger now, this should pick up the changes. So you can see the long name queues get cut off and isn't a tooltip that shows you the full name. So Honeycomb isn't ideal, but it does give you an idea or let you know when there are issues. You would also be able to tie triggers to your items, just like you did with item prototypes. You'd be able to go to trigger prototypes if you need email alerting or SMS alerting for the queues. Cool. Thank you very much.